2014 was a monumental year in the history of the FSOL digital era of the future sound of London. The release of Environment 5, signalling the first proper new FSOL album, at least in the way it was marketed, in nearly 20 years. With this under their belts, however, the band did not simply rest on their laurels and continued to work on a large amount of new music under different aliases, much of which I'll be looking at today. The first video covering 2015. Welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. I say that, but I've once again missed out an older release, so I'm going to quickly finish off 2014 with the release of the future sound of London, Artworks 1. Release date 28th November 2014, first edition, 19th of November 2016, second edition. If FSOL are good at anything, other than making electronic music of course, it's surprising us. Hands up who thought the next release announced would be from the Archives Volume 8. Me too. Instead we got a surprise through FSOL Digital today, Artworks. So read my news blog on the morning of 28th November 2014. This one came totally out of the blue. The FSOL Digital description reads, 36-page A5 full-colour booklet depicting FSOL's art from the last 7 years. Hand-numbered and limited to 250 copies. Booklet comes with a free gift download of 4 tracks, 320 kilobits per second MP3. So yes, it's a collection of artwork from the FSOL Digital era really. For a lot of people the draw will have been the EP, especially as most of the art has been seen before. But as an affordably priced mini-book, it's a nice artefact in itself and of course contains some teasers. There's also a bonus for vinyl collectors who won't have most of these images otherwise. Before I get to the bonus EP, I'll have a quick stroll through the book's contents. The front cover features a mirrored shot of a semi-demolished building. Sound familiar? Yes, it's pretty reminiscent of the My Kingdom cover. The outer cover of the book is in glossy card, making it reasonably sturdy. Page 2 has credits suggesting the front cover image will also be used for the then upcoming release of Environment 6. Interesting that at this point the series looked to be returning to pluralised names. Page 4 has the first appearance of an emblem made up of several overlaid curves, as well as a partially obscure picture featuring a mirrored flyover photograph. Mirrored images and flyovers, two of Buggy's favourites. Page 5, alongside Environments 4 and 5 elements, features the old Yage text logo and 6 black and white photographs of trees, quite likely taken by Brian. Page 6 features the FSOL Digital Mix Shawneen cover with additional spiky and text from the script for Yage the film, reading, "Because they have told us they dream about being water." Page 7 has various black and white shots of what look like the mess that is Brian's home studio, with synths, computer keyboards and effects pedals strewn with cables and cassettes, including what might be a copy of Bacteria from a baboon's stomach. And on the right is a screenshot of the mid-2008 FSOL Digital homepage. Page 10 features a montage of covers including all the art from Electric Brainstorms Volume 7 and Document 8, covers for the original FSOL Digital batch of releases like Z-Box, Part Submerge, Polemical, etc., covers of Ramblings of a Madman, Promo 500 and some gear shots, among others. Page 14 is a new shot of Brian and Gaz with the Earthbeat logo and the text 2015, the future sound of London, suggesting the booklet came out a little earlier than originally planned. There are some new glitchy black and white images on page 15 alongside some Environments 2 art, as well as some more elements of the Yage script. Page 16 features the Environments 4 cover with differently placed text, a studio mixer and computers and photographs, and some small photos including some rather attractive fungi. As well as the back cover of Environments 4 LP, page 17 also includes the Electric Brainstorms 3 cover, a lot of circles and some abstract paintings. Page 18 features pictures of Brian's baby grand piano with piano EMS text. There will apparently never be a consistent name for that project. Page 21 has a lovely teaser picture featuring several DIY CDR covers laid out. A handwritten CDR called the Future Sound of London BBC Sessions, including tracks from the 92, 95 and 97 Peel sessions. Trying to make Impermanent Things Permanent is listed as the Mellow Hippo Disco Show, suggesting this CDR comes from at some point this century at least. Master reference CDs for Lifeforms, Far Outside of Lung, Teachings from the Electronic Brain, Divinity and ISDN, a CDR of the Humanoid Peel session, a CDR called Lifeforms, a DVD-R called The Video Collection 92 to 96, one on many fans' bucket lists, that the Mellow Hippo Disco Show, hosted by one-man band of Cosmos with his face on the cover, something with a Dayglow yellow cover featuring the EBV logo and a picture of Gaz. It might read Teachings from the Electronic Brain. What is likely a proposed cover of the 2001 Z-Box 2 CD release, and most intriguingly Fish Smoking, a collection of unreleased material by FSOL, a precursor to the From the Archive series from the early noughties, a photo of two dead fish with cigarettes in their mouths adorning the cover. There's also a stack of master tapes and photographs of the Papua New Guinea t-shirt being printed. Page 22 is a 2008 portrait of the band from the Freeze magazine article, shots from Clyde Port Authority, a film soundtrack by Brian's father, and CD art for From the Archives Volume 5 and 7. Page 23 has got some crumpled paper, an unseen photograph of a footbridge with wireframe graphics on top, and more Yage script. The new Curves logo reappears once again, as well as Japanese text saying Broken Sky. Page 24 has marble-like paintings in orange, and the band name and EBV logo featuring on top. Page 25 has the inside tray image from the Environment CD release, an aerial photo of a city, the tide coming in on a beach, and text saying Long Shadows. Page 26 with a photo of a wall, including a spotlight taken on a rainy day, judging by the spots on the camera lens. Neurotic is written in English and Japanese. 9 artworks of a black circle and scattered lines, and the escalator photo from the booklet's bonus EP are also included. Page 27 has pages 6 and 7 of the Your Body Robotic booklet, photographs of some derelict-looking railway carriages, and some monochrome photos of analogue music gear. Alongside Environments and Environments 2 art, page 28 also includes the original web cover for From the Archives Volume 2 and some more extracts from the Yage script. Page 29 has Gaz's first-person story from the Archives Volume 5 booklet, plus a couple of small gear photographs, a Vox amp and what might be an old Super 8 camera, as well as a countryside shot from what looks like it might be Brian's part of the country. Page 30 is another intriguing teaser. A bench and telephone sit in a small alcove by a window overlooking a cityscape. Text reads, Mirror Opaque. Envisaged installation, AKT3 Mondom. New York, Environments 8. 24 oscillator light affected panels. Geomatrix design enables tracking of the sun. The description suggests something similar to Cloudscraper, only as an art installation in New York and part of Environments 8. Given that Environments 8 is currently due around 11 years after the release of artworks, it is likely this is very much on the envisaged end of things rather than any sort of concrete plans. AKT3 Mondom? No idea. Mondom is apparently say in Hungarian. Page 33 features photographs of drum kit, compass, a stack of synths, computers and mixers, and a sign reading Please Lift Here. Page 35 has the credits, including information about bulk orders of FSOL digital stock and live bookings, and Chinese text reading either perish or dying. Lovely. Amongst all these, there are also several covers, back covers, disc art pictures, inside booklet photos, backs of LPs and so on, of various archived and Environments releases, as well as other FSOL digital era art. 2 years later, a second edition of the booklet was released for those who were unable to pick up the first one, which sold out in a matter of days. The contents of this version are identical, but the cover features a blue tint as opposed to the orange and yellow of the original. Generously, or tediously, depending on one's perspective, the EP with this version differs, replacing I Turn to Face the Sun with Undulating. As for the music itself, the exclusive digital 4-track EP definitely fits a lot of the FSOL digital era releases, although specifically for the first time for FSOL. No information about the origins of the tracks came with the EP, leaving it to fans to work out whether these are archived or new recordings, although by this point the distinction had begun to blur. The Views series continued with Views from Across the Room, while I Turn to Face the Sun had then recently been issued as an Environment 2 bonus track for vinyl purchasers. Those two pieces ended up on the Rarities compilation Life in Moments the following year, while the others remain exclusive to these downloads and, as both editions are long out of print, are effectively unavailable for purchase. Hopefully they'll appear on another Rarities set in the future. Shortly after the book's release, Brian revealed that a second was already in the works to be called Histories. Books are something the band have mentioned over the years as part of their Ultramedia broadcast system concept, and it seemed that in 2014 they were finally interested in following up on the idea. Cattle. Cattle opens with some dark, almost new agey sounding synths before a slow chugging breakbeat comes in. The high-pitched synth plops and layers of noise suggest this gloomy piece is probably an archive track, maybe ISDN era. Near the end there's a sample of what sounds like a person or animal yelling or grunting, making it a genuinely unsettling track. Viewed from across the room. 3 pensive piano chords lead this piece, which gradually lead into arpeggios based around these chords. It's a gentle and very beautiful track, and the subtle guitar notes played over the top complement the mood brilliantly. It closes on more of the glitch sounds as heard on previous Views tracks. It first appeared on Artworks 1, the first Views piece to be released on anything other than an Environments album, opening with a 30-second environment featuring a slamming sound and subtle field recordings. The following year it appeared on the Life in Moments compilation minus the opening environment. Further 2 years later, and it appeared on the Views disc of Archived Environmental Views, without the opening environment but with a closing section of tinkling wind chimes and gurgling synths, gradually leading into chirping cicadas and crashing waves. The piano is by Daniel Pemberton. I Turn to Face the Sun. Now this is a weird one. I Turn to Face the Sun is actually a very, very radical reworking of Glass, the opening plucked melody apparently sourced from the same MIDI files. It's not known whether this was a later reworking or something that was created as part of the potential Glass single session, so I believe it might be the latter, but the full track itself was completed at some point in the FSOL digital era. This fact was revealed on Facebook, where Gaz asked fans if they could guess the origins of the piece. For now was spent chatting to Gaz and other fans exchanging jokes until the answer was discovered. At some point, an earlier version of the piece, dating to around 2008, also leaked online with different synth melodies. Another strange thing is the subtle variation in the 3 versions. It was first released as a bonus download for those purchasing the Environments 2 LP through FSOL Digital. Shortly afterwards it appeared as part of the bonus EP for those purchasing the Artworks 1 booklet through FSOL Digital, and these 2 versions play at different speeds, with the Environments 2 version being marginally slower. This can be told by comparing the waveforms, in which the beat kicks in at the same time, but the main track ends 5 seconds apart. When it appeared on Life in Moments the following year, it was at the Artworks speed, but featured a very different outro environment. The strangest thing, however, is how a track this good has, until very recently, only ever been available as effectively a bonus track with another purchase. Undoubtedly one of the finest compositions in the band's history, I Turn to Face the Sun matches beautifully 90s Gaz's melodicism with FSOL Digital era synths. It opens with the plucked string melody of Glass Origin, which leads into further synth arpeggios and a wonderfully strange beat, matching tambourine shakes with modulating snares and reverse sounds. A descending synth string melody is added, upping the emotive stakes before cutting out for the plucked melody to be transferred to a more playful sounding synth. Beats briefly disappear, only to return with huge squelching analogue synth melodies to take the lead, at which point goosebumps normally appear. The track's only flaw is that this section doesn't go on for at least another 8 bars. A brief Dead Cities-esque descending synth note closes the main track with haunting choir samples leading into the closing environment. For the 2014 versions, this consists largely of the eerie strings also heard in Glacier Part 1's closing section, making it likely the track underwent some development during the recording of Environments 2. On Life in Moments, the piece ends with quiet piano arpeggios, acting as a much needed buffer between the track and the more intense bring that follows. I Turn to Face the Sun is an unsung hero from the band's catalogue, a track that deserves to be more widely heard, a real bonus for those who chose to dig deeper into the group's work for sure. How it never ended up on an Environment album itself is totally beyond me. Thankfully, the wider reissue of Life in Moments a couple of years ago has meant that this track has been heard by a wider audience, and justifiably so. neurotic. After a couple of brighter, more melodic pieces, the Artworks 1 EP moves back into darker territory for its closing track, Neurotic. It's a fitting title for this strange, unsettling piece with widely panned drums, layers of reversed electric guitar, sinister synth chords and synthy squelchers. Given the use of guitar, it's possible it was recorded during the 97 sessions, or it could easily be a new track. The short piece fades out by around 1 minute 50, closing with a brief surreal environment of bubbling synths and barring sheep. Undulating. Undulating is an interesting choice for the reissued Artworks EP, given that it was clearly recorded after the first edition was released. An outtake from Environment 6, it features the album's signature sound with melodic, melancholic, minor key synth arpeggios, choir-like pads and stuttering IDM-like beats. Looking at this while covering the 2014 period of the band, as I am unwisely doing, it sounds incredibly different to the other tracks of the era. It features a similar structure to the band's 90s work with beats and melodic elements coming and going throughout, various odd synth sounds and percussive samples laid over the top, and the different elements combined in different ways. It closes with many of these samples, bringing the piece to a close with a chilling atmosphere. Blackhill Transmitter 3. Release date 28th January 2015. The third outing from Blackhill Transmitter with their usual blend of kraut and granular synthesis. Rain struck the tower, but we persisted. The broadcast was scheduled, it had to go ahead. Suddenly we were plunged into darkness. Silence. Nothing. Then the noises started, slowly building. The transmission had begun. So reads the blurb for the third Blackhill Transmitter EP. At this point, the EP almost felt inevitable. Following earlier instalments and a t-shirt, Blackhill Transmitter was clearly becoming a major part of the FSOL digital canon. A promotional video of Battery Room was added to YouTube, featuring 8mm Super 8 footage of Brian's father and a co-worker helping install a dish on the transmitter in 1956 for an outside broadcast of some kind. Further to this, information about the recording of the EP was shared to the FSOL board. Brian plays drums in places, with the last track featuring drums by John Goslin and the opening piece featuring Will White. Musically, it's a continuation of the ever-developing Blackhill Transmitter sound, with less in the way of abstract ambience and more heavily krautrock influenced pieces here, with guitars and drums playing a large part. The mood is still stark and cold, however, matching the beautiful shot of the tower on the cover. The entire EP features in full on the following year's Blackhill Transmitter LP, and all tracks play seamlessly. As for the name, Blackhill Transmitter appears to be the project with the least consistency between titles. So far, EP, Second, and 3 cease to function. A typically Blackhill Transmitter haunting drone opens cease to function, with slowed live drums played by Will White gradually fading in. Eventually a dark, growling synth melody comes in, keeping the track in a particularly ominous mood. Layers of other synths and bass play throughout, while the drums are continuously changing, going from full swinging rhythm to staggered individual hits. Just before the 4-minute mark, the beats cut out, allowing the drone to play out towards the outro. Granular noises are added as a brief closing environment. As for the whole 3 EP, the full version is included on the Blackhill Transmitter LP. Battery Room. More staggered drums on this track, played by Brian, with drum machine rhythms added to bring a more rhythmic complexity to the piece. Various effects and sounds are included to add to atmosphere, but the focus is very much on the beats. The title appeared on the tracklist for Electric Brainstorm Document 8, but the track itself is completely different, with the EBS piece remaining unreleased. Once again, the full track appears on the Blackhill Transmitter LP. Returning. An ambient piece with a bright drone and layers of granular textures. The textures feel quite percussive and always remind me of a wooden boat tied up, waves continually knocking it into the jetty. Single synth notes appear sporadically, adding an eerie atmosphere, while glitches and static provide further textural interest. A wonderful moment of breathing room between the more intense rhythmic tracks. And once again, the full pieces are also included on the album. Recovery. One of the least electronic sounding Blackhill Transmitter tracks, Recovery is based around live jazzy drums from John Goslin, an old friend of Brian's from Glasgow and an occasional guest on the Z-Box releases, an electric bass guitar riff, atmospheric wah-wah guitar and organ chords. Herringull samples are included throughout the piece, giving it an unusual seaside vibe which doesn't quite tally with the general Blackhill Transmitter theme, but maybe that's just taken it too literally. An excellent energetic piece on the far krautrock end of Blackhill Transmitter. Once again, the full thing appears both on the EP and on the Blackhill Transmitter LP. Intelligent Communication, Drive. Release date 2nd of March 2015. Ask and ye shall receive. In his many discussions with Brian, FSOL board member Pandemonium asked if maybe Intelligent Communication's Principal Emotion EP would ever get a digital release. Considered to be one of the finest releases of the Jumpin' and Bumpin' era and a sadly overlooked gem, it was eventually reissued on FSOL Digital in March 2015. And this message also came along from Brian. I found Intelligent Communication. I also found a 17-minute jam we did based on Drive. It's great. Gonna have a look and see what else can be done. The 17-minute version was cut down to 10 and used as the A-side for a Drive single, released alongside the Principles of Motion digital release. Effectively a jam, it's only very loosely based on the original. For B-sides, a further 2 remixes were created, more closely related to the 1991 track. The single was given some wider distribution, but only FSOL digital purchases received the IC7471 mix. The entire process from asking to release took the space of 6 weeks. A simple animation for the 2015 mix appeared on YouTube as promotion. Drive 2007 live rehearsal desk mix. As the title suggests, this track came from tentative rehearsals for what became the band's brief ISDN tour of 2009. Described on FSOL Digital as a mix taken directly from the desk with a further post-production at Studio 9L West. It's very much a jam utilising some elements of the original rather than a direct remix. Indeed, other than being in the same key, it's very difficult to hear any drive in there for the bulk of the track. New beats and synth arpeggios are very much present, with some mad drum machine programming in places. It's possible that the background drone is built from elements of the original under a cavernous reverb. Eventually, around 6 minutes 30, synth strings are heard low in the mix, and that drive chord sequence eventually links the 2 tracks together. This kind of extended IDM jam is something that was very much unheard in the band's catalogue at this point, and holds fascination for that fact alone. Drive 2015. With less of a Detroit techno sound, largely due to the electro-sounding drum machine, this reworking of Drive remains faithful to the original's beautiful chord sequence but cuts out the layers of synth arpeggios. Gives it a much more laid-back and atmospheric feel. A deep, smooth bass line is the track's main hook, with the distant, misty chords acting as soft textural backing. Occasional hisses of white noise and short vocal snippets provide variety throughout the track. At 3 minutes, a wispy synth harp comes in, seemingly related to the melodies of the original, if not exactly replicating them. At 5 minutes, a major change comes in the form of siren sounds, taking the blissful piece into more tense territory as drum rolls are added and papery hisses cascade into reverb for the darker final minute. Drive IC7471. Exclusive to the FSOL digital release of Drive, this remix of the 1991 track, much like the standard 2015 version, focuses on the original's chords rather than the big melodies, and here the beat is more complex, without the electro elements giving it an ambient IDM vibe. Various percussive elements come and go throughout the piece, while the chords and bass are more repetitive, although still changing from time to time. Although not a highlight of the single, it's enjoyable as another alternate look to how the piece could sound. Drive Radio Edit. Not, as the name suggests, an edit of the 1991 track, but of its 2015 update. Structurally rather similar, but with a different ending, featuring a long kick-free section and ending on a hissing sound. Can't imagine it ever got any radio play, but with the full-length version running to a lengthy 7 minutes, it's nice to have a briefer version to pop on from time to time. Touched Music, FSOL Night 1, 14th of May, 2015. At the start of May 2015, Martin Bolton announced on Facebook that he would be hosting a night of music on his Mixlr page, playing tracks from the future sound of London's back catalogue and many unreleased gems. After 2008, FSOL's radio appearances dried up, with only a couple of brief Amorphous mixes for Solid Steel existing outside the band's own Podroom and SoundCloud. So the idea of unreleased material getting a proper broadcast of some kind was intriguing and indeed exciting. Martin, of course, is the owner of Touched Music, the charity label who had put out a couple of multi-artist compilations featuring 3 unreleased tracks from FSOL and Humanoid in 2013 and 14. He'd started doing regular broadcasts on Mixlr as Touched Music Radio in early 15, sometimes playing general electronic music, sometimes focusing on an individual artist. Given good links to FSOL at this point, Humanoid's Post-Human was given to him for Touch 2 at the last minute when another track had to be removed. It's not surprising that Brian was on hand to send over a few exclusives to give people a particular reason to tune in and to promote the label. Although not a traditional broadcast in an FSOL sense, it is included here for posterity, especially given the development of the Touch shows over the course of the decade. A fan recording has been shared as a bootleg, as a raw recording the entire night, including a couple of minutes of silence before the show started. These nights are really fun, with a lot of entertaining chat from listeners on the Mixlr page. Brian's usually hiding away in the chat, and Gaz has been there a couple of times too. He once had a daft trolling session giving out fake titles on one of the shows, and sometimes news gets announced in the chat or on the show itself. The first show is fairly simplistic and straightforward, with tracks from the band's 90s albums, from the Archive series and environments, as well as the 1994 Robert Sandel interview from the Mixing It show. 5 exclusive tracks are present at the time, with one of them still unreleased to this day. 2 of them, remixes of B12 and Funckarma, would be later released on Touch 2 remixes later in the year, and indeed the compilation was first announced in the chat room on the night. One of the 3 originals is the studio version of Santana, first heard on ISDN show as Carlos. Static Field is an outtake from Tales of Ephedrina, later turned up on the expanded deluxe edition of that album. Arc City is less easily recognisable, with groovy electric bass, brass stabs and funky wah-wah guitar samples, but moody synths are breakbeat and synth noises. It dates to 1996, perhaps a Dead Cities track, perhaps one of those that was developed in the very early Isness sessions. The rest of the show is just a selection of Martin's favourites at the time, subtly cross-faded, and thus of relatively little interest as a bootleg, although it's a nice place to go if you fancy popping your FSOL collection on random at some point. It's all been done here for you. And of course Lizard Crawl is there, as it appears to be a legal obligation for any FSOL digital related product at this point. The Amorphous Androgynous, a monstrous psychedelic bubble exploding in your mind, The Wizards of Oz. Release date 16th of March 2015, 2 CD, 18th of April 2015, 2 LP. In typical FSOL fashion, this was first announced on July the 22nd, 2014, in a Facebook chat between Gaz and a fan. Rumours circulated about this release dedicated to Australia, eventually being confirmed as a new Monstrous Bubble 2 CD release in January 2015. It has explained the roots of the mix to the Quietus. We hooked up with Warner's Australia head honcho Tony Harlow, who is a huge Monstrous Bubble fan. He sent us tracks which quickly opened our eyes and ears. We began to be pretty intrigued because we genuinely didn't know much of the musical output of that continent despite being such fervent record collectors. So we began to search ourselves, and the idea kind of progressed from there. It took a year before we decided to dedicate a volume of the bubble exclusively to Antipodean cosmic space music. Indeed, Antipodean is a better description as the set does include a handful of New Zealand artists, and one track by Congress being American but featuring an Australian member at one point. Numerous interviews and articles took place, including a 24-hour Amorphous takeover of the Quietus, with Gaz writing an article about his post-pub playlist, including hilariously a recording of Noel Gallagher's 2011 press conference, and using it as a way to spout some of his favourite conspiracy theories. Clash and the Quietus were also furnished with a guest mix, using tracks from the album, one mix being an excerpt of the other, but let's not have qualms, they were making mixes for free here, with Gaz later complaining about this on Facebook. The 2 CD set, mixed as usual, came out on Warner's Australia, where the journey began, in collaboration with classic Australian label Festival and Monstrous Bubble Records. Bizarrely, each disc features a bonus track at the end, not mixed in with the other pieces. Given that there's no standard edition of the mixed album, the phrasing is a touch disingenuous. Both tracks are used as excerpts linking other tracks earlier in those respective discs, perhaps explaining their presence. A few weeks later, a 2LP edition featuring a selection of the group's favourites, unmixed, was released for Record Store Day. A clear vinyl repress followed in 2016. The CD was released on time in Australia, with international copies being delayed by a week. Musically, it's largely kind of the thing you'd expect, with one difference. There's nothing here you will have heard on one of the radio and podcast editions of a Monstrous Psychedelic bubble exploding in your mind. The release was a voyage of discovery for the band as much as listeners. There's material dating back to 1965, a snippet of the Missing Links' garagey H2-2s, up to the contemporary, with an appearance by Tame Impala. Cybertron's progressive electronic 70s sound is a new direction for a Monstrous bubble mix. Everything else is fuzzy psych rock, acid folk, jazz fusion and other instrumental grooves, spaced out hard rock, a bit of smooth prog, a couple of tricky pigeonhole tracks. The pairing of Pip Proud and Hiroshi and Claudia on disc 2 is a very odd run, and even an Eastern tinged raga. There's also a very welcome appearance of a couple of Aboriginal linked pieces. There are comparatively few samples, effects and spoken bits between the tracks, making it feel more like a traditional mix CD and less like a Monstrous Psychedelic bubble, although the array of material is typical MPB fare, showing that, although rarely covered by the media, Australia and New Zealand were well versed in making psychedelia back in its original late 60s boom and have continued to operate expertly in the area since. One very notable omission is Dougans, whose music is often very spiritual and psychedelic sounding. I would have put a bet on one of their 90s tracks appearing before reading the tracklist. The release was mastered by Sid Arthur's Joe Magill. The artwork then. If I had to put it politely, I'd say the cover is one of the ugliest album covers I've ever seen in my life. I could just about cope with the really garish, overly digital collaging in all its Psytrance-esque glory, but were it not for the poster on a notice board at the village hall word art style of the title. It's rare that I'm overly negative in this series, but every now and then it's really hard to find anything positive to say. Away from the Bubblehead Man and his Serpent Pal, there are splashes of abstract colour which are actually quite pleasant to look at. That's it. Booklet features brief liner notes by Gaz, you know the kind of thing by now, including a disclaimer stating that this is no way intended to be a definitive document of Australian psychedelia. The previous 3 volumes are advertised as being available from FSOL Digital, despite all being out of print by this point. The case is the first official release by the band to be presented in a digipack, discounting the mispress of the Isness and the Brian-related Sounds of Monsterism Island, with a 6-panel fold-out double digipack sleeve housed in a cardboard slipcase, which is nice. The booklet informs us it's an Antipodean cosmic space music odyssey from 1966 to the present, which is only 1 year out. Intriguingly, while family and release-appropriate industry types are mentioned in the thanks section, management and the Amorphous live band are absent this time. Reviews were slightly more sporadic than previous volumes, but typically glowing. Musically, it's a solid selection, not as consistently brilliant or bizarre as Cosmic Space Music, but not as uncomfortably jarring as Pagan Love Vibrations. It's another strong entry into the series, not an unwelcome one, especially after such a long break. But it's not one I've listened to as often as the first three. It's just less to my taste, going much heavier on the fuzzy rock side of things. It's hard to deny the band now knew how to select a bunch of great and popular tracks. It's remarkable to think that there were between 100 and 150 tracks set aside for inclusion initially, with many final takes made until this particular version came along. It's testament to the love put into making these sets as strong as they can be. 2015 remixes, compilation tracks and production work. A somewhat different year in the odds and ends department this time, with remix work largely handled by Humanoid. I'm not sure anybody could have predicted that 12 months before, especially with these being the very first Humanoid remixes. The Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble remix series continues to trundle along too. The only compilation track comes in the form of an anonymous piece for Touched. And we get to hear more fruits of the band's production work for Noel Gallagher and the first of their Paul Weller collaborations. And then some utterly pointless remixes of the Gallagher tracks, because I'm a sucker for torture. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, The Right Stuff, released on Chasing Yesterday. So the Noel Gallagher album never came out. There were many reasons given and a long and tedious series of articles in the press with both Noel and Gaz talking about things. Noel went from being super excited and hinting at recording a second album with them to being tired of the whole thing, not wanting to return to new music after his tour, to being unhappy with the mixes, to saying the whole thing was shit and he destroyed the masters. Gaz spoke about Noel not wanting to push himself, about being afraid of being experimental, about how the songs weren't as weird as Noel was making out. The general consensus was Noel was afraid the Amorphous album would overshadow his own stuff, and therefore he'd be seen as the lesser partner in the creation of it. The whole thing became incredibly tedious. I tried to be reasonably meticulous with this series, but I'm not going over old interviews from the time because it was just an unpleasant experience. The FSOL board, various Oasis forums featured threads with fans getting increasingly angry at the whole thing from both sides. Honestly, one day I still think that Noel's going to come out with it as the Great Lost Album, maybe after his career goes on a bit of a wane and he has a flop album. The upshot of it is, anyway, that the album was scrapped. And then when the second High Flying Birds record came along, the two tracks that were written from scratch with Amorphous appeared, with additional production and mixing, and surprise surprise, they were singled out as the album's best tracks in pretty much every review. Which was almost certainly the final nail in the coffin for the actual album or future collaborations between the band and Noel, especially given this quote by Gaz in an interview with The Brag. There's two tracks on Noel Gallagher's album that we produced. He actually wrote those as well, but he was a bit naughty. Nothing burns a bridge like forgetting to give your co-writers co-writing credits. Anyway, The Right Stuff. Jazzy drums, droning acoustic guitar chords, a vocal melody shared between Noel and Joy Rose, some distorted saxophone, a soaring chorus comes in, and there's a bit of a guitar solo near the end. It's clearly not as psychedelic as the original Amorphous version would have been, but it also doesn't sound much like a Noel song either, other than a couple of his attempts at psychedelia on 2000's terrible Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. It's not surprising it received acclaim, and even YouTube commenters tend to praise it as a career highlight. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, The Mexican. The second of the two Amorphous co-productions on Chasing Yesterday is the slightly more straightforward of the two, with a chuggy guitar riff, cowbell heavy drums. Instead of going into a conventional chorus, however, it continues with the same riff throughout, adding a stoned, slightly psychedelic feel. A post-chorus section with brass and bizarre wah-wah-wah vocals adds strangeness. Gaz even provides some backing vocals. Nevertheless, this is one for the strictest of Amorphous aficionados only. Paul Weller, White Sky, released on Saturn's Pattern. I like some of Noel Gallagher's songs. I don't like Paul Weller. So the announcement of Amorphous working with Weller to me was a bit like the Gallagher announcement for a lot of people, just oh god no. The first product of the collaboration was used as the lead single for Weller's album Saturn's Pattern, and it's a pretty loud blues-tinged rocker. There's very little trace of Amorphous in there, to be honest, other than a bizarre effect on one of the guitars in the background. Met with a very mixed reaction from Weller's fanbase, albeit largely from those hoping he'd return to the sound of his 90s Britpop adjacent albums such as Wildwood and Stanley Road. The album's closing track, These City Streets, features Liam McGill and Raven Bush from Sid Arthur, and one wonders whether it was Gaz and Brian who introduced them. So you know my opinion on the song, I'm not going to go into it. Paul Weller, White Sky, Prof.Kybert vs. the Moons remix. An exclusive remix of the digital edition of Saturn's Pattern. That was a weird, short-lived period of releasing stuff, wasn't it? This remix of White Sky throws in some spy film piano and mellotron, making it feel like a bit like a Cartel version of the original. Ever the gloomy bitch, I'd take it over the bluesy rock and roll vibes of the original any day. Paul Weller, Crossing Over, released on Saturn's Peak. Our co-written track with Paul Weller and Noel Gallagher, Crossing Over, surfaced on Paul's new EP, Saturn's Peak, remixed somewhat by Paul's right-hand Stan, particularly in the drum department. News to follow on our renditions of this. The spake Brother Cobain on 4th December 2015 on his Facebook. Weller's own version of the track, which will form the Amorphous album-length single Mantra at some point this century, maybe, apparently with Noel involved, and some four-to-the-floor drum machine action here. The drums don't work. God, that sounds like a Verve song. Reverse guitars and synths abound throughout, with a break for fuzzy bass. It's hard to know just how much of this is actual Amorphous material, although with the co-write, the song itself certainly belongs to the three of them. Don't mind this one too much with its minor key pulses and uncharacteristically subdued vocals from Weller. It's passable. B12, Orbita Tolv, rebuilt by Humanoid. This was first heard during the first Touched Music FSOL night, at which the Touched 2 Remixes album was also announced. With tracks from that second epic charity compilation, remixed by other artists from the compilation, it provided an opportunity for some excellent cross-fertilisation of producers, leading to some wonderful tracks. Here Brian turns B12's Orbita Tolv into a slice of heavily atmospheric acid. 303 line squelches through the whole piece, with rhythms starting as chopped up breaks before moving into a drum machine-led outro. Behind this are gorgeous pads, Eastern-sounding vocal samples, synth sequences and strange effects. It's a beautiful and haunting piece of music, a long way from what one might have previously considered as anything that might have been released under the Humanoid name. Indeed, had it come out as an FSOL remix, I doubt anyone would have batted an eyelid. The track was later included on the super limited MAO 016 lathe cut, the MAO CD2 compilation from the same level, and as part of the first Mind Maps CD. Brian is a B12 fan and says it was a pleasure to remix them. Funckarma, Emplixian Ambient Yage remix. The second of two remixes provided for the Touch 2 The Remixes compilation, also later appearing on the MOA 016 lathe cut. This track reunites the band with Funckarma, who previously provided numerous remixes for Your Body Robotic under various aliases. This time the remix is credited to Yage and is very much, as the name suggests, ambient in tone. Subtle glitchy drum machines give the track rhythm, but the emphasis is on synth pads and atmospherics. What sounds like a field recording of Plain Children is fed through cavernous reverb while moody synths swirl around the mix. Despite the rhythmic elements, it feels like an incredibly still and poignant piece of music, the beats being as much a part of the texture as a type of rhythm. A beautiful track that, combined with the B12 remix from the same album, kicks off a run of FSOL digital era remixes in fine form. Second Mouse, Jinx, rebuilt by Humanoid. Chris McKeown, Second Mouse, perhaps best known as Carbonax, became a bit of a controversial figure on the online music scene, voicing some controversial opinions, shall we say. I think he's largely disappeared since, but for a brief period he was associated with the Touch Music label. I'm sure that the Humanoid and Yage remixes of McKeown's views are in no way an endorsement of them by Brian or Gaz, so I shall endeavour to treat this as tracked on a purely musical level. The remix of Jinx is a rare example at this point of time of a Humanoid track not led by a 303. Instead, the focus is on glitchy beats with some heavily complex programming from Brian. The re-arrival of Humanoid suggested a return of the acid sound, and although this is the case with quite a lot of the tracks, this remix shows a different strand of the project, moving into contemporary IDM territory. The beats are continuously changing throughout the track, as synths are similarly lacking overt looping, with pads, growling bass lines, occasional notes coming and going, seemingly at random. It's immediately the biggest headfuck of a production job in the broader FSOL catalogue to this date, and a sign of fascinating things to come from future Humanoid releases. The track also found Brian once again working with Martin at Touched, who released this album. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, The Right Stuff, Psychemagic Remix. Released on Where the City Meets the Sky, Chasing Yesterday, the remixes. This text was written a while ago when I was working on a blog about FSOL. It's sadly not something that I would be able to do these days, but I woke up that morning, had some breakfast, I took my dog out for a walk on a sunny, crisp winter day, and I felt great. Then I came home, turned on the computer and realised it was time to write about the shit house remixes of Noel Gallagher tracks that Brian and Gaz didn't even get a co-writing credit for. What a time to be alive. This remix is mid-tempo 4-to-the-floor beats, the original's vocals, a few breaks for some electric guitar or sax. I honestly wouldn't bother. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, The Right Stuff, High Flying Birds in 3D version 1. At least this one's a little more in line with the original, an electronic psychedelic take on the track. Ambient-ish synth opening with Noel's vocals leading into a section with detuned synths and breakbeats. There are even some backwards saxophones over the end. Released as a limited 12-inch from the tedious artificial scarcity collector baiting Vinyl Factory label, with a full release later in the year on Noel's remix EP. Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds, The Right Stuff, High Flying Birds in 3D version 2. Only backing vocals on this one, otherwise it's breakbeats, synths, organs and backwards saxophone. A pleasant enough track. Not much Amorphous in there really. Not much Noel in there really. The Future Sound of London, Cold Dark Field, released on Covert. After a couple of very successful charity compilations on Touched Music, Martin Bolton came up with an interesting novelty idea for his third album on the label. Rumours of artists involved abounded and continue to many years on. Some tracks have been confirmed since, including Plaid, Exum, Merya and Carsten Flum. Some people were suggesting Aphex and Boards of Canada. I don't think either of those has really worked with Touched. With Brian now seemingly a regular contributor to the label, an FSOL track was very likely, and was officially revealed the following year on the second Touched Music night, to be Cold Dark Field. Fans on the FSOL board had already identified the track within a couple of hours release anyway, but it was nice to get confirmation. I'm not sure I would have identified it myself actually, with my mind still in Environment 5 and Life in Moments mode, and the moody synths, electronic glitches, clattering off-kilter drum loop occasionally appearing, and overall bizarre abstract structure feeling so far away from that 2015 version of FSOL, I don't think I would have ever properly guessed it. Spoken words, backwards notes and field recordings at the end are at least more in keeping with more typical FSOL, but overall it's a very strange piece to come out only a few weeks after something like A Somnambulant Drift. Nevertheless, it's a beautiful and bizarre piece of music, one that could easily be twice as long without getting boring, one which sees FSOL stretching its legs out into new, strange electronic territory.
Right now I really don't want to.
The Kooks, Murdered and Downer, a Monstrous psychedelic bubble remix by the Amorphous Androgynous. Released on Hello, What's Your Name? Oh god, I never thought I'd have a track by the Kooks in my collection. Just about the low point in landfill indie of the late noughties, the band truly are one of the nadirs in the history of British guitar music. Anyway, somehow or other Brian and Gaz ended up remixing Murderer and Down from their 2014 album Listen for the remix album Hello, What's Your Name? By this point, the Kooks had begun to experiment a little with influences from African music, bits of funk and so on, and it's not them at their worst, but Luke Pritchard's sneery nasal voice opens the track, and it goes into a laid-back version of Murderer with jazzy drums, trumpet improvisation, a bit of warm guitar. Around the 4-minute mark there are some wobbly synths, reverby backing vocals, some backwards piano. It's beginning to get slightly interesting so long as you can get past the Jesus is my Buddha and Buddha is Muhammad lyrics, which is maybe the original draw for Gaz. This being a Monstrous psychedelic bubble remix, it's 40 minutes long and in several sections, with the second part starting around 6 minutes with a sitar, an instrument barely heard in the band's work for a few years. After a minute or so of ambience, it's back in with a breakbeat and brass in the Down remix. I can't listen to Pritchard's voice without wanting to forcibly insert the guy's anus into his own mouth, so I just tend to skip through this. Eventually he fucks off and there's some nice Hammond organ work, but generally this nonsense continues through to the end of the track. I think I've listened to this all the way through uninterrupted once, and I have no plans of increasing that number anytime this century. And on that note, that's all we've got for this week. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Do leave me a comment down below. I'd love to read your thoughts on the music, on the video. There's also lots of buttons there which will really help promote my channel. I appreciate all the support I get and all the comments. I'll be back very soon, hopefully sooner than this one. This was a little bit later than I expected, and I will be covering the second half of 2015 with a bulk of new FSOL material, so I really hope you'll join me then. Bye bye.